Well. Want to do a walk and talk. This is Lan Wilf, the old biologist. I have refrained from stating my name on my videos up until this point because I didn't want to throw it out. I'm big on minimizing the digital footprint. A little old school, you can tell by my camouflage. But we're out here. The rut is rapidly approaching in Mississippi, North Mississippi. And I figured I never like to leave the home place and go forth into the field without my rifle, because I do not want to have an opportunity to get away. And this year, it's been a little bit of a struggle. I've had some success, but it's been a struggle. We usually fare better on this place with heavy mast crops, but the mast crop this year has been so heavy that deer movement in daylight has been insignificant. But we're starting to see things improve a little bit. Daylight movement's picking up, so I'm cautiously optimistic. Seen deer more than I've not here at home, but shot opportunities have been challenging, which is a new concept because I've got a good shooting rifle. And usually it works out, but it's just when you got stuff in between you and them, better not shoot. I've had to pray over this video a great deal. I've had to think about the proper ways to phrase what I want to say. I wanted to try to touch on the captive industry. I wanted to discuss Oklahoma's solution, but I also wanted to address one or two concerns with the captive industry. As a whole suite of concerns, but one in particular I wanted to address. In my old age, I've learned to not stereotype, because some of the captive industry folks that have seen the elephant and the bear that is chronic wasting disease kill deer in their facilities, they understand now. And some just whistle by the graveyard. They don't understand what they're doing. So I wanted to lead with this. Is in dealing with the captive world, the captive industry, and the sale of white-tailed deer and the turning of white-tailed deer into livestock. I didn't want to emote and get angry. I wanted to do like the Apostle Paul did whenever he would go to a new town. In the book of Acts, he would always go to the synagogue first, and he would reason. I want to reason. I want to ask questions. And I want all of you that are not on either side, don't know what it's all about, I want you to ask questions. And the first question that I would like to propose is, was the white-tailed deer meant to be livestock? Did God intend for us to raise deer in captivity? Do deer that survive in the wild do well in captivity? Or do they have to breed for a more docile individual to survive in captivity? I know of one enclosure owner that did his breeding PIDs correctly. He captured wild does and he suffered a horrible mortality rate. Horrible. It's amazing to me that the man did it. I don't know this individual personally. I know of him secondhand, but the information I got was very valid. And this individual is one of the few people I've heard of that actually did the breeding pen concept correctly. But he caught a bunch of does, and most of them died. What does that tell you about a wild deer doing well in captivity? Does the captive industry marketing concept, do the people that ascribe to that school of thought understand that based on the North American model of wildlife management, and all of us, at least that hunt on small properties, and all of us that are not elitist, we don't want it to be the king's deer. We don't want it to be the king's turkeys and ducks. We want opportunity to go and enjoy the outdoors as well. Those of us that are not ridiculously wealthy, those of us that worked our whole lives for 30 or 40 acres, our little slice of heaven. Do we want that opportunity, or do we want to stand by and let people market a resource that belongs to us, all of us, and profit from it? And that leads into the thought process of the Oklahoma solution for chronic wasting disease. So they are profiting from a public resource. And also, and this is not an original thought, it came from another friend of mine who's still in the heat of battle with the state agency. Because I want y'all to think about this and the spread of chronic wasting disease and consequences. Because we have not, I will preface with this, we have not, in all and most cases, been able to prove that CWD came from the captive industry every time it's jumped a state. It originated in a captive facility in 1967, Fort Collins, Colorado. Already talked about that. But this is a very hard question that all of us need to think about. And I want you to listen very carefully. Is every buck age class, when you measure their Boone-Crockett score, every buck cohort is a bell curve. You got some over here on the left-hand side that are small, 10, 20% tops. You got 10 or 20% that are much bigger than average. Usually, we're only interested, as most trophy hunters are only interested in that top 5, 10%, 140 plus. You got a whole gob of them in the middle that hover between 115, 110 inches and 140. So your average is around 130 B&C score. That goes from the Delta of Mississippi to the King Ranch in Texas. They're going to average around 130, 135 inches. In the captive world, the middle of that bell curve shifts over because they're line bred for big antlers and they're fed incessant protein and they're missing other things, but that's neither here nor there. We can talk about that later, but they're fed a constant 20% protein diet, in some cases 25. Higher protein usually doesn't stay in the body, they pass it on out. About 20% is all they can handle. But be that as it may, in the captive world, that middle of the road deer is going to be 160, 170, 180 inches, maybe even scaring 200. You got a whole gob of non-typicals on the right-hand side that are ridiculously big. But what about all of those deer on the left-hand side in the captive world? We need to think about that. That's the question. So you've got a whole slew of 150s, 160s, 140s that are, by all intents and purposes, in the captive industry, they're worthless. What do they do with those deer? Do they bolt gun them in the head? Bury them? Or do they find a market? What would that market look like? Would that market be egotistical landowners that wanted to put them a 170, 150, 160 out there and make them a social media post? Would it look like that? Would it look like introduction of a new genetic strain? What would it look like? Introduction into free-ranging herds of genetic material, DNA of unknown origin. What would that look like? Would a captive facility owner rather sell those deer to somebody for $400, $500, $600 and make a little something off of him, or would he be honest and bolt gun him in the head, bury him? What do we think? You see, this leads into the discussion of the solution for CWD related to a genotype that is not resistant. It lives with it longer. I'm not going to get real deep in the weeds, but Oklahoma has proposed, because their commission and their legislature is made up heavily of captive industry influencers, and they are proposing to release deer of this genotype, 96SS. I'm not going to get deep in the weeds on alleles and codons because I'm not a geneticist. So there's a specific point called an allele in these deer's DNA. 96GG is the most common. These deer are more susceptible to CWD, but they are incredibly common. 96GS lives with the disease longer, but they're kind of middle of the road. 96SS is much less common, and they live with the disease for an extended time period. However, they still have it, and they're still shedding prions on the landscape. And although they hypothetically live longer with the disease, what unforeseen consequences could come from a heavier proponent of these genotype deer on the landscape? Another question: have these deer been challenged with the disease? Where is the data to support that this will work? We're dealing with a 60-year problem. 1966, 2025, we're looking at about 60 years. We're looking at major issues in 100 to 200 years with deer populations. See the Arkansas study. Already posted it in the description of one video. I'll try to put it in the description of this one as well. But I want you to think about, have these deer been challenged by the disease in a larger enclosure, not a breeding pen, 1,000, 2,000 acre enclosure that's positive? What was their mortality rate? Did they have an impact on the genetic makeup of that herd, or did that little tidbit of DNA get watered down by the deer that were already there, the more common deer? Obviously, the captive facility owners are not out of the good of their own heart. Or are they, out of the good of their own heart, going to give these deer to the state to release? Or are they going to make money? Should you follow the money? Do they have hard, concrete evidence that their hypothesis will work? Or are they only bringing emotion to the table to profit? Where's the evidence? Please provide it, because I have changed my tune a little bit on the captive industry, and I do think these people can be our allies, but we have to sit down and we have to reason together, and we have to have evidence to move forward, because kind of like kudzu that was released on the Lurcel Bluffs in Mississippi, seemed like a good idea to stop soil erosion until it overtook everything else in its path. What unforeseen consequences could there be of releasing these deer on the landscape? Are you going to use toxicants to remove the standing crop of deer that are more susceptible to the disease, so they don't water down the gene pool of the deer that are resistant? Is that part of the plan? Because how are you going to get using toxicants to kill standing crop of deer past the public? How do you propose that? Because that would be a key to nuke them and start over. Because you don't want to take an eyedropper full of DNA and drop it in a pool and expect it to turn blue. I liken it to taking an eyedropper full of ink, dropping it in a swimming pool and expecting that swimming pool to turn blue. How are you going to change that genetic standing crop with just a few deer from a captive facility? Or are you going to make the CWD problems worse? But you're going to make money. It's a lot of questions. It's a lot to think about. But two things, three things, four things we need to ask. We need to ask a series of questions. Where's the data? Where's the evidence that it'll work? Because we don't have to get in a hurry, because we've got time. We're dealing with a 60-year problem. We can take a decade to conduct science and investigation. Science and the captive industry can work together. But we need to have a logical, non-emotional path forward, and not just haul off and do something for the sake of saying that we can provide you a quick fix, because there is no quick fix. Slowing the spread is a lousy path forward, and state agencies have to toe that line. Yes, CWD is killing deer herds. Arkansas paper cinches that up. Benton and Marshall County, Mississippi cinches that up. We also need to take a hard look at some of the harvest rates in the hot zone in Hardeman and Fayette County, Tennessee. I'm not real familiar with the data from Wisconsin, so I'm not going to speak on it. But we need to ask where the evidence is, and we have time to sort out an intelligent approach forward. We need to ask, you do realize that you're profiting from a public resource? Or are you going to give the deer to us? We need to investigate removing the standing crop that's there to replace them with deer that are more resistant to the disease, if those deer actually can handle it. We don't know enough about these 96 SS genotype deer to speak intelligently about it. We only know that they live longer, and the potential is there for them to spread the disease more readily. I think that the concept of turning these resistant deer loose is ill-advised. I think it's rash. And all of us have lived long enough, at least most of us watching this channel. A quick emotional decision usually isn't the best in any facet of life. Financially, personally, relationally, the whole 9 yards. We need to look at the evidence. We need to look at the track record. And we need to have data, because a lot of these folks that are pushing this in the captive industry, they don't have data. They say they do, but when you press them for it, they don't provide it. And we don't know how these deer fare in a more free-range, similar environment. So we need to have that information. And I don't want to write this off. It could be something in the future that we could use, but we need to be smart about it. And with that, this is getting a little long, but the last thing I want to do is alienate the good guys in the captive industry. They do exist. Those that put up a high fence because their neighbors won't keep their walker hounds off their property are justified. Those that put up a high fence to keep the overpopulated deer herd out so they can move their property forward and manage their deer density, they're justified. What I'm talking about is playing God and genetic manipulation, and I disagree with it. It's wildlife. It should be as close to wildlife as we can get it. And with that, I appreciate all of y'all. And I want you to think about these questions that I asked. What are they doing with the left-hand side of that bell curve? Could that be possibly tied to the spread? Is it intelligent to take these deer with this recessive trait and release them into the wild without having done any background on it to amount to much? I must vehemently disagree, and I hope some of you will too. And with that, this is the old biologist. I've got some stuff I got to do, and I'm going to try to get back in the woods this evening. Maybe I'll shoot. Y'all have a good one.